plan, source, make, ship, sell. Each consumer sends about 12 kilos of product to landfill on an annual basis. There is an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases within our industry by 45% by 2030.
Welcome to The Big Question, the series from Euronews where we speak to some of the most influential people in the world of business. And today I'm joined in the studio by Colin Browne, the CEO of Cascale, the global non-profit alliance trying to make the clothing industry better for the planet. Colin, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here, thank you.
First of all, just for our audience as well, can you just set the context for what Cascale does?
Cascale is a global non-profit alliance that works across the entire consumer goods value chain, looking to unite manufacturers, brands and retailers in our efforts to reduce climate change and increase social justice.
Okay, and what percentage of the market does that represent?
We have probably about 50% of the market overall. We work primarily in sports and fashion, but increasingly we're expanding into other parts of the industry as well, sporting goods, luggage, other parts of the industry. The alliance includes manufacturers, brands and retailers and affiliates. So we have a very broad mix of membership.
And Colin, the fashion and textile industry in Europe, can you just talk me through the size of the market? For example, how many pieces of clothing are we as Europeans buying each year?
Well, it's around about 42 pieces. We estimate it's about 42 pieces of apparel is bought by each consumer on an annual basis. The bigger concern is the amount that actually goes to landfill. We believe that each consumer sends about 12 kilos of product to landfill on an annual basis, which is significant. We estimate there are around about 170,000 textile companies in Europe and around about 1.7 million people involved in the manufacture of textile.
And in terms of impact this is having on the planet?
Well, we have some figures, and we believe our industry is responsible for about 1 gigaton of CO2 emissions on an annual basis, which is somewhere between 3 and 9%, I think, is the figure that is often quoted.
And how far are we from building a sustainable solution?
I think we're a way off, unfortunately. I spent much of my career in supply chains, and we've always thought of supply chains as kind of plan, source, make, ship, sell. Which is a very linear kind of process. But if you think of building a circular supply chain, it's going to have to be plan, source, make, ship, sell, return, bring it back into the supply chain. That last quarter, we've yet to really stand up. There's legislation in place and being put in place which will certainly help do that. But the industry and society itself needs to figure out how do we join that last part of the equation. Until we've figured that out, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to build a truly sustainable circular industry. I think one of the things we have to be careful of is that we suggest that everything has to be more expensive. I'm a big believer that, you know, if people can make money out of it, it'll be done a lot quicker. So working through how can we make sure that anything we do from a sustainability point of view allows us to still be competitive as an industry is really important. And not all those solutions have to cost more money.
And Colin, what about, you know, of course we have fashion influencers on Instagram and TikTok. That hunger for fashion doesn't look like it's slowing down. What's your view on fast fashion influencers?
The consumers will often dictate what the market needs to produce, and I think part of the role of organisations and brands themselves is to communicate the issues that this model perpetrates. And so I think we encourage brands to be responsible in the way they think about that. Industry decarbonisation roadmap is a big one that we're leading at the moment to try and bring manufacturers together and brands and affiliates to kind of work on this issue. So we know that it has to be solved, but it's not necessarily only going to be reliant on the consumer.
And who are the culprits for perpetuating, you know, the fast fashion?
I'm not sure if there's any culprits. I think it's just the way the world and the industry has developed with social media and other things has required that there is an always-on kind of culture that we have out there, that you always want what the next person has. And one of the challenges we have as an industry is because supply chain lead times are so incredibly long, it means the industry has to work much further ahead. I think as we move towards a more circular, sustainable supply chain, ultimately we will unpick that, and I think we'll get to a more fast-moving kind of model. But the question is, if we're fast-moving, does that mean people buy more often? And so it's a question. So it's a bit of a dichotomy that we're going to have to unpick.
Do you think there are any other huge issues with the industry right now?
Having the industry work together to address climate change is where we feel that there's a huge opportunity. And we feel that if we can bring the industry together, there is an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases within our industry by 45% by 2030. We can do it. We know how that needs to be done. Now, 70% of the emissions from our industry comes from the manufacturing of goods, but we can't abdicate responsibility to addressing that just to the manufacturers. We need to work across the industry to work through how do we actually unlock that. Remember, many of the brands, retailers work with the same manufacturers. And so if they each talk to the manufacturers individually, the manufacturers cannot be successful because they're being pulled in so many different directions. One of the pieces of work that we've done recently is looking at where the emissions come from at an industry level. And approximately 80% of the emissions come from around about 10% of the facilities. And we know if we actually really target that and really address that, then we can drive meaningful change.
And Colin, can we talk about what else needs to be done on a policy level in Europe to help promote change in the industry?
Well, both the CSRD and the CSDDD are landmark pieces of legislation which we were incredibly excited about. From the point of view they start to put in some real targets, some real benchmarks and processes that holds businesses accountable for addressing the issues. I think Europe in itself sets the cadence of how these initiatives evolve. And we were all pretty excited about how they were evolving. I understand that any legislation can be onerous on businesses, and we need to find a way in which we ensure they develop in a more efficient and less onerous way. But just recently, the omnibus discussions that we're starting to hear more about is that it does look as if they are looking to water down that legislation. And that would be a huge mistake. It's something we're really concerned about because, we have an opportunity to lead, and it does feel as if we are abdicating our responsibility to lead on sustainability. And so we would encourage the legislators here in Europe to lean into it, understand that it's difficult, but all progress depends upon unreasonable men, I think, as George Bernard Shaw said, and we need to lean into it. And as Cascale, we'll continue to hold our members accountable and work with our members to ensure that they meet the requirements that we believe are appropriate. But I would encourage legislators to lean into it and actually have the courage of their convictions.
Colin, thank you. And just finally, why do you think forming an alliance like Cascale is important for achieving these aims in the industry?
We are not going to solve this if we work alone. These issues can move from being an addition sum to a multiplication sum if we really work together. We actually do know how to solve it. We know how to address it. The technology is not beyond us. We know the answers. The question is, do we have the courage, capacity and commitment to do it?
The big question. Colin, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's been a pleasure.